Anastasia Matthews is here with us again, and I'm Pablo Kiolseth. We are here today to talk about a documentary called You Don't Nomi, which will be screening via the International Film Series website, internationalfilmseries.com. And just to bring things back a little bit for the uninitiated, this documentary, it has to do with a title that came out in the middle of the 1990s, 1995. Showgirls was released in 1995, and it was the first widely released NC-17 film that teamed up director Paul Verhoeven and screenwriter Joe Eszterhas 3 years after their phenomenal success of Basic Instinct. That really tore up the box office. They were basically given carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to do, and this was their follow-up. And unlike Basic Instinct, Showgirls was a huge commercial and critical flop. Now, in this new documentary titled You Don't Nomi, and Nomi is spelled N-O-M-I after the protagonist's name, Nomi Malone, who was played by Elizabeth Berkley. This notorious film gets reevaluated by a range of commentators who appreciate Showgirls for a variety of different reasons. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into a trailer right now, and then we'll have a few words to say when we come back. So here's the trailer.
I hadn't seen something so perfectly bad in years. It was done. Civilization had done its job.
Showgirls is also signaling to fans of Paul Verhoeven that it's like his other films.
People are much more inclined to think that it's nearly criminal to portray sex. Sexuality is part of our life, and we should not be afraid of it.
Oh, I used to love Doggy Chow.
I used to love Doggy Chow, too.
You can't believe they're trying to sell us this.
You never know what's going to become a cult film. For those of us that get it, it can become our religion.
This is a role that does not come around that often.
It's weird having that protagonist as a character that's so cathartic.
I'm Nomi Malone.
Nice dress.
Thanks to Versace.
And the worst picture of the decade is Showgirls.
I want to watch this thing over and over and over again.
I think we're still talking about Showgirls because we're not done with it.
The film that gets reclaimed as a stealth masterpiece.
Whew. Well, so what I want to say about this is that I remember seeing Showgirls when it came out theatrically, and what was stunning to me was that given that Basic Instinct was that movie that just was playing for months and that everyone saw, and I was curious. I mean, Paul Verhoeven is such an interesting director. I mean, RoboCop is amazing. Starship Troopers is amazing. His early Dutch movies are amazing. He's someone who has actual memories of World War II carnage and explosions, and he brings a lot of gravitas to what he does, but he also brings knowledge of what it's like to live in a fascistic state. And he saw that clearly. Starship Troopers is incredibly potent as a political satire almost of what was to come, and it was very prescient. And RoboCop, same way with police brutality, which is right now, it's obviously people are rioting because of it. So I went to see Showgirls. Sure, I want to see what was up, and frankly, I could see how it was a very direct satire of a capitalist, system. But I was there alone. There was nobody else in the theater when I went to see it. And that was like the opening week. And I was alone in the theater. And now at first, I left the movie and, kind of was scratching my head for a little bit. But I will say that then a few years later, I ended up having a relationship with someone who was a dancer. And she insisted that I screen the film to her dance troupe. and all her dancer friends would break out into the, the scissor moves and all that kind of thing. Like they loved the movie. And, it was clear to me suddenly that this movie had been co-opted, not just by dancers and not just by people who thought the movie was so bad it was good, but it had also been kind of co-opted by like the gay community. And there's a lot of interesting reasons for why that would happen. And you get to find out what those reasons are when you watch this documentary, You Don't Know Me. And I mean, I'll just stop right there, and I'm going to hand this over to you because, Anastasia, I think this is fascinating. You had not seen the Showgirls before, and You Don't Know Me was basically your introduction to Showgirls. So a fresh perspective, you take it away.
Yes, absolutely. I hadn't seen Showgirls before, but this documentary put forth so many very interesting takes on it that it made me want to watch Showgirls. So I saw it afterwards, and I have to say it was super interesting to just watch it on two different levels. One, just seeing the movie for what it was on screen, and then also seeing the different arguments at play that were put forth by this documentary. And absolutely you can see why it speaks to different cultural groups. Like here's a still from the film talking about how it's become a set piece for drag performances and things like that. It's just...
And it's been redone as a musical as well.
Yes. Yeah, I thought that was super interesting too, that it takes on all these different lives depending on what type of culture you're talking about. Like with the LGBTQ community, but also like feminist communities and different things like that. It's spoken to people in so many different ways. So something that I thought was interesting with bringing up this classification is it talks about not only how a movie can be so bad that it's good, but also how a film that might appear to be just awful over time develops into something that's more culturally accepted and prevalent. And something that super spoke out to me was the categorization of it roadmaps how it moves from a piece of shit when it was first released to a masterpiece, and now it's kind of considered a masterpiece of shit.
And there are some people who will swear by the fact that this is actually, I think there was actually a big, if I recall correctly, there was a big coffee book that came out at some point that was devoted to Showgirls, and it had, like, the opening quote was from Joe Esterhazy, and it was something along the lines of, it's more than just a movie about tits and ass, or something like that. And there was more to it. That's the thing. There was more to it. But at the same time, it was also a product of its time, the mid-90s. And it was also a time when Joe Esterhazy was basically, he'd blown up so large that I remember at the time of Basic Instinct how it was common knowledge that he was able to just write the sort of like the elevator pitch to a concept on a napkin, on a restaurant napkin, and get millions of dollars just for that whatever he wrote on a napkin. And so that kind of excess, that kind of crazy capitalistic excess was definitely there in full force with Showgirls. It's a really interesting documentary. There's, could have used some more recent interviews with, all the players, be it the director. I mean, especially Elizabeth Berkley. I think there was they gave her a big section, but it seemed like that was a bit dated. So it was a little curious if they didn't dip into some very recent commentaries. But that aside, I mean, it will provide you with a snapshot of kind of like bloated 90s big scale movie productions that then were just infamously tanked. It's entertaining, and if you're a fan of Showgirls, you should definitely see this. If you want to know why people would be fans of Showgirls, you should check it out. And it will be playing, again, you can see it through the internationalfilmseries.com website, where the distributors are kind enough to split the profits with us while we're on sort of self-quarantined, shuttered, waiting for the day when we can actually come back. Anna, I just want to thank you so much for helping share in reviewing these things with me. And I will say that maybe the next thing, we have a documentary that we're going to be screening tomorrow called Picture a Scientist, which is a documentary about systemic gender bias in academia. And it's very powerful. And it's a little odd, of course, to watch that and watch this kind of like back to back, because this is Showgirls was such a talk about toxic masculinity and male gaze and all that kind of stuff. Picture a Scientist, which we're going to also be making available through the website as of tomorrow, Friday, for a couple of weeks, is the absolute opposite, and it's super fascinating. But why not dip a little bit into each pool, right? So again, thanks, Anna. Always a pleasure, and we'll talk again next week.
All right.